It's the lens, it's the lens, it's the lens, gotta live diverse. It's the lens, it's the lens, it's the lens, live diverse. You are listening to The Lens Living Diverse, a podcast brought to you by the CNIB advocacy team. Join Nisha, Vivi, and I as we speak to individuals with intersecting identities who live with sight loss as they share their unique stories. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Lens Living Diverse. I am your host for today. I'm running it solo. It's been a while since Vivi and Nisha have hosted an episode with me. I really miss you two. So definitely, if you're listening, we got to do an episode all together and reunite as one. So today, as I always mention, we have a very special episode. I have a good friend of mine, Jason Osborne, who is going to be on today's episode. And we are going to talk about how he does comedy and he incorporates his intersecting identities as well in his comic gigs. And for someone who wants to get into comedy, I say that Jason's my mentor. So we are going to chat today. Hello, Jason. How you doing today?
Good, Ben. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. I'm so happy that we're on, or you're on today's episode, and it's gonna be fun. We might have to restrict ourselves a little bit.
Ah, no
Yeah, have
deal.
some have some good conversation. So, Jason, if you could tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I was born and raised Scarborough, Ontario, or Toronto. If you don't recognize the pre-amalgamation of Toronto, diagnosed with low vision, known as Stargardt's. It started when I was around maybe 10 years old, but it took 1 to 2 years to diagnose because it's a long time ago. And I don't know, went to Centennial College and studied marketing and international business, and then went on to work mostly like call center sales and customer service um, for companies like TELUS, Bank of Montreal, Rogers, and ended up working at CNIB about 3 years ago. I think we just passed the 3 year anniversary, and also been doing stand-up comedy for the last, let's say, man, long time ago. It's been about, I'd say 7 years. 7 years. Been doing comedy, and I mean, I guess it's like a side hustle for me, but yeah, enjoy doing it, and enjoy working and just like living life and all that good stuff.
Love it, love it, love it. And 7 years, that's a long time. So you're the Richard Pryor of comedy right now, you know? Like, yeah, we got OG here today. You were saying that you live with Stargardt's. If you would like to share with the audience, I know you did a little bit with your diagnosis, but
Yeah,
if you'd like to share your sight loss story and just kind of having to adjust, especially getting diagnosed at 12.
yeah. Yeah, sure. It's actually not really a funny story, but it actually starts like a year before I started to lose my vision. Because when I was like in the fourth grade, so I was like 9 or 10, and all the kids in the class had to go to the nurse's office and do an eye exam, and I think everyone passed, and I was like the last one in line. And then I did the first eye was fine, went off without a hitch. And then I did the second eye, and then everything was blurry, and I couldn't get through it. So they sent me to see a optometrist to get an eye exam. So I think I went with my mom, and I was fine. So it was like, well, I don't know if it's perfect vision, but I didn't need glasses at the time.
Mhm.
So it turns out I have like long eyelashes, so I was like holding a like a notepad over my eye, and then the lashes got into my eye, so that's what made it blurry, and I didn't realize that at the time. But then
Mm,
looking back, that's what happened. So, perfect vision at that point. And then a year later, I just having a lot of trouble in school, kind of like reading the board and reading like the overhead projector, and I was like reading, like books and papers and stuff, and then I'd be like looking like really close to the paper and like squinting and kind of struggling, and everybody would tell me that I needed glasses. So they thought, it's just nearsighted and needed glasses. And I think back then I was in the fifth grade by then. So I was like, 10 or 11. And I think that, yeah, so I was thinking like the worst case scenario is that I have to wear glasses, and, I'm going to look like a nerd and everyone's going to make fun of me and they're going to call me Urkel and all that good stuff. And so my mom eventually found out because I couldn't read. I had like a key tag or something. I couldn't read what was on it. And then she realized, something's going on. So she took me back to the eye doctor to get another exam. And I didn't, they showed me where I was last year, what I was able to do, couldn't read anything. And then all the charts and stuff, like, couldn't make out any of the letters. So I I was sent to see an ophthalmologist, and then, that they couldn't find anything either. So eventually I had to go to Sick Kids. And
mm,
so that was like, I had a couple of like kind of repeat visits. I think it was like between Sick Kids and Toronto Western. I just saw a lot of specialists in that 1 to 2 year span. And so eventually they diagnosed me. So by then I was in the sixth grade, and it was, I think back then they called it cone dystrophy. So basically the parts of the eyes that see detail were damaged. So they said it was genetic. So I inherited the genes from my parents, and there was no cure for it. And then there was no cure for it, but it doesn't progressively get worse, and it doesn't heal itself, and there's no prescription, no surgery. So I had to live with it. So I think that was around the time that I joined CNIB as a patron. So by then I was 11 or 12 back in the day. So then, yeah, so I've been living with it ever since. And then, so just kind of figuring out like, don't want to date myself, but it was the 90s, so technology is like nowhere near where it is now. So, we didn't have like smartphones, and there were computers, but like again, they didn't perform the way they do now, and they didn't have
mm,
laptops. So had to kind of learn to do everything the hard way. And that's, I mean, like, again, everything's gotten easier now. Just growing up, I think I was like the only kid in my school with any
mm,
type of sight loss. So I didn't have like anybody to kind of go to. I just had like doctors, and they would kind of just examine you once a year and then say like, no no change basically, and nothing better, nothing worse, and just live with it.
mm,
So that's how I grew up. So you kind of learned to do stuff the hard way, and I think I was shown. I think, yeah, one thing I noticed about you was you did one of the round tables, and you said your parents told you like not to let on that you had, an eye problem,
yes,
and just, because then you'll get treated differently, and you won't get like the same opportunities as everyone else. So I was kind
yes,
of like taught that way to, just kind of do like whatever everyone else is doing, just do that, and then like, just get by, and so you can grow up and get a good job and be successful. So,
yeah,
but I mean, I kind of learned, I learned to embrace it, and to embrace it, to ask for help when needed, and to, find, be curious about what's out there in terms of assistance and adaptive technology, things like that. So yeah, it's just, I'm still, here many years, many decades later, I'm still learning, but I think it's just, uh, I think it's improving in terms of what's available, but physically I'm probably still the same in terms of my vision.
yeah. And I could totally relate to a lot of different aspects that you were saying with your story. And even for myself when I was younger and I was diagnosed at 2, but
Yeah.
no one would find out because I was just walking around fine, not a cane user.
Yeah.
And something that I really can identify is having to get glasses.
Yeah.
And the first thing I thought of as well, I was like, oh man, I'm gonna be Steve Urkel.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I thought of it, and it's so funny with and I don't believe you shared your background. Your If you could share with the audience your background.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, both my parents are from Guyana, so South America, because sometimes they say Guyana, they think Ghana, but
Yeah, yeah,
South
no.
America, not West Africa. Yeah, so yeah, they're both born there, and then they both moved here. They met in Canada, and then I was born in Canada. So yeah, that's my background.
Exactly. And no one, we're gonna tell the audience, we're gonna emphasize so
Yeah,
they understand, not Ghana, it's Guyana.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm the Ghana boy. So, yeah, just with the lens, living diverse, the audience know that, hey, we're not confusing that no more.
Yes.
We're dispelling that for sure. So, I know, I like definitely a lot of things I can relate to, and just having that aspect of do not tell anybody. You have to just try and be like everybody else. You could be like tripping, and the cane use, they were probably, and I don't want to make assumptions, but how were your family when it came to using a cane or technology?
Well, I didn't use a cane until like recently. So that was like, yeah, it was never an option. It's a good question. I mean, nobody really talked about it. I mean, they'd ask about it kind of, but they wouldn't ask me, they'd ask my mom. Because again, when it started, I was like really young.
Yeah.
So, and then she was a nurse. So, and she would go with me on all my appointments. So, she knew better than I did what was going on. So yeah, they, kind of ask her, how it is, and then I think, again, the first thing people tell me is the first thing people ask me is, do you need glasses? Right. And again, it's not,
Mm-hmm.
if it was like an easy answer like that, and like maybe I look like a good looking guy who like just doesn't want to wear glasses, but it's not the case. But yeah, I think they're mostly supportive, right? Because like I guess one thing is I don't drive, so
Yeah.
most of them do. So I get like kind of picked up and dropped off a lot because of that. And then if I have trouble kind of like reading with signs or with like menus and things like that, they'll help with that. So yeah, it's very very supportive family. Yeah, so
No, I'm glad to
I'm
hear that
fortunate that
because
way.
no, I'm so glad to hear that because to have not support, it's always beneficial, right? For
Right.
sure, and it just that whole "Where's your glasses?" Yeah,
And I
so
guess the
many
only other
kids.
time would be like school. There's one story in particular where when I joined the CNIB, maybe like a year after, they sent it was like a backpack with like supplies and like school supplies.
Yeah,
And the backpack said CNIB on it and Canadian National Institute for the Blind, and it was signed by Wayne Gretzky,
nice.
and who was again, way back when the best player, well, he's still the best player in hockey, but he was actually playing back then, and he was a spokesperson for CNIB. So I was really excited to have that, and I wanted to take it to school. And then my mom's like, "Oh, but it says like blind on it, so people think you're blind." And I'm like, "But I'm not." And then I'm like, "I can just tell them I'm not." And then like, and then but she didn't want me to draw attention to my vision, so I ended up not taking it. So it's something I kind of regret. Um, and then I think the other thing is like with work, when I started working, I was kind of advised. I had like a cousin that's in HR, and I was advised, when you get hired somewhere, don't tell them about your vision
Mm,
until they actually offer you the job, and then, when you're doing your like the intake stuff, then you can tell them. So, I guess I didn't feel great about that because, people, especially your family, will always tell you to be honest about stuff and not to
mm,
lie when you're growing up. And then it's like, oh, but you can lie about certain things if it benefits you. So it didn't make perfect sense to me. I mean, I get it now that I'm older, right? With sometimes when you're doing an interview and you try to explain that to people,
Yeah.
they might say it's okay. And then if you don't get the job, then you're wondering, well, is that the reason? Or, because there's like, I always feel like there's not enough transparency when it comes to that.
Yeah.
But
And
it's always in the back of your head.
yeah, and it's almost like a protective factor, right? Like with
Yeah,
your family, they want to see you protected, right? And
right.
and I feel like from talking to a lot of guests on the show and just talking to individuals who come from the Caribbean, African diaspora, where back at home, when you look at things like blindness and low vision,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah,
not enough services, it's not protected. It's if you are a person who has low vision or blindness, you're stuck at home, right? There's
right.
no support. So what I think sometimes is with our parents and our family members who come from those countries, they
Mhm.
have the mindset of that's going to happen here. They're bringing that
Yeah,
along with them, right?
right.
So I feel like with more transparency and as generations are going and as they're seeing people like us succeed,
Yeah.
it's starting to have a basis of, oh, okay, maybe my child is okay, right? Maybe I don't have to tell them, oh, not to do this or not to have these services or cane use, right?
I mean, I get being a minority and being a person of color, it's like that has its own set of challenges. So,
Mm-hmm.
to add to add like, like vision loss to it, or like, disability or having accessible needs, then it's like, you're twice as, it's twice as challenging, let's say. So then, yeah, so you're, basically certain people will get opportunities or advantages because of how they look. And then it's like you have to like, in some cases have to overcome, your ethnic background, but then you're also overcoming your vision. And then it's like you have to prove that you're as capable as anybody else because it's not obvious. So yeah, I get why that instinct to protect your kids and stuff. And it's not like, I don't know, you go to school with other people who are like, they have
Mm-hmm.
Canadian families and stuff, and they tell you life's not that bad and stuff, but it's like they're looking at it differently than how you
Mm-hmm.
how you see life and how things have gone for you. So
Yeah, it's a different lens. Look at
yeah.
that. See what I did there? A different lens,
Nice.
you know what I mean? So, uh, definitely you did highlight. I was even gonna make mention of being a Guyanese male, and I know you touched upon it, especially coming from that family dynamic. What about adding, as I made mention, being a male of Guyanese descent? How was that kind of navigating through the spaces of life?
I mean, it wasn't that bad. I guess it was different, right? Because I think there's like, I don't know if it's a matter of being Guyanese, but just with being black, there's like there's usually like that kind of preconceived notion about people. So for example, like when I started doing comedy, when if you do like a show and most people are like, white or just like not black, and you're the only black guy there, and then like people kind of expect you, just by looking at, if they don't know you, just by looking at you, they expect you to be like the kind of the black stereotype
The
in comedy.
token.
So you're gonna jump
Mm-hmm.
up and you're gonna talk loud and you're gonna tell jokes about fried chicken and like, uh baby mama drama and drinking, all that good stuff, right? But like, I'm not that kind of guy. Not that no, I'm not the stereotype, basically. And then also when it comes to being Guyanese, I'm not like the Guyanese stereotype either. Just because I was born here, and then you can I guess you probably tell by talking to me, not the no, I don't have the stereotypical the Guyanese accent or anything. And then my grandmother, may she rest in peace, used to always say when like I'd answer the phone and people called to talk to her, and then give her the phone, and then they'd ask, if I'm her grandson, and like I sound Canadian, and it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm from I'm from Canada, right?
Yeah.
But some people talk, and then like so I'm not gonna like I don't. Some guys like will watch, they'll watch like BET or something and see their favorite rapper and try to emulate that and talk like that and stuff. But it's never been natural for me. So I just always kind of just be true to me,
Yeah.
and not like, don't try to emulate somebody that you see on TV, because then it always looks cool when they do it. But then if you're trying to copy them, and then people know that you're not that guy, then I feel it looks ridiculous. So
Yeah, no, I feel you for sure, and I'm lucky that my favorite rapper is myself.
yeah, okay,
So I'm lucky in that regards. But no, thank you for sharing kind of that experience of even just to be a male Guyanese descent with low vision. And I like how you emphasize, you were like, you know what, I'm just me, right?
yeah,
These are things that are part of me, but I'm Jason Osborne, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
now that's a really important message, and I believe that's an important message for young black men to know that y'all don't have to emulate anybody. Like,
yeah.
be yourself. You know what I mean? You have your intersecting identities. Incorporate that within yourself. So I really like that message that you portrayed for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. So with all these experiences, you were making mention how you're a person with low vision, Guyanese male, and I bet you have other identities that will probably crop up throughout this conversation, or if not, you're definitely a three-dimensional person. But I want to get into incorporating that comedy side of it.
Yeah,
And I gotta say, when I first found out you were a comedian, it really captured my eye, right? And
yeah,
first YouTubed your stuff, and I was dying, like side splitting, and just your tone of voice, and you even just made mention that you're not the stereotypical "Yo, what up, man? Yo, what you saying, man?" You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
Chris Tucker, whatever, right? You're yourself.
right.
What brought you to the passion of starting to do stand-up comedy?
It was, yeah, so stand up was always something I wanted to do, probably since college, just because I was always funny in like say smaller groups. So if you're with like one friend, or you're with like a group of friends, and you're just like talking and stuff like that, and then like so yeah, and everyone's like always like you should be in comedy, you should have a show, and all that good stuff. And it's like something, it's a compliment, but it felt like something people say, and I always had like a fear of public speaking. So
Oh, well.
I didn't even like to, when you're at work and you have to do a presentation, they even like that. So, yeah, I didn't think it would happen. But I did have like a passion for writing comedy. So I would want to be like the guy that would, sit backstage on like Jimmy Fallon or something and just like write jokes, and then like let somebody
Saturday
else
Night
tell,
Live
put them
type
on a
deal.
cue card and let somebody, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Let somebody else tell my jokes, and then like they can have the pressure of performing. But I didn't have any right for. And then I had a friend who he had did a course at the Second City, and then he invited me to his grad show, and it was all like people that had done the course, and then they're just performing for friends and family. And so I thought, like, if I can do it with if I can do it with like a class, like with I'm going to be taught to do it properly, then I might not embarrass myself, and
Mm-hmm.
people. So I took the course at the Second City. So I took like the intro to stand-up comedy, and then, did the grad show, and the grad show went really well. And so I was able to kind of build on that. So I was able to kind of get over. I was like, okay, well, it's always like very nerve-wracking, performing for the first time, but then once you get that first laugh, and it's like, okay, well, I can do this. So I guess the confidence started to build. So yeah, that's how I got into it. And then I just from there I started doing open mics and book shows, and started booking my own shows. So that's the long story. I think the short story is that my mom she watches TV a lot. So I figured if I was on Fallon, then she would listen to me because I'd be there. And then but I could also do like Canada's Got Talent, but I haven't gotten to there yet. But yeah, that's the short of it is that I just wanted my mom to see me. So I was trying to get on TV. But yeah, I do like doing live shows and audiences and bars and comedy clubs. It's just given me a chance to kind of express myself. I think at first I was just kind of telling superficial jokes, and then people kind of started telling me, "Oh, well, you should go deeper. Talk about your vision and talk about stuff that's happened in your life. Makes it more personal, more authentic." So I was able to kind of explore stuff about myself that I wouldn't have kind of thought about just kind of sitting around thinking, and it's not something you talk to other people about because it
Mm,
doesn't casually come up in conversation. So I was able to just kind of think about me and come up with the premises and why it would be funny and what people would like about it. So I was able to kind of
yeah.
work out stuff like that, family and vision loss and kind of being black and having low vision, things like that. So I'm grateful for
Yeah.
the opportunity.
Oh, I love it. And that leads up to my next question. And I am a person who likes to look at the positive side of things, right?
Mhm.
And when we look at something like low vision and blindness, stereotypically, and that taboo of, oh my gosh, you're blind, you're low vision, oh, life must be so hard, and then adding the blackness, right? Like
Yeah.
you're black, you know what I mean? Like it's an extra double barrier, which I'm not gonna lie, there is. We can't dismiss that, right?
Right.
So the thing I wonder, and even just with you utilizing comedy, how do you flip it, and how do you feel about kind of flipping that and using that comedy as they say, that sword
Mhm.
to make people laugh and to make even yourself laugh?
Okay. It's a good one. Well, one thing I learned from doing comedy is I think if you can make fun of yourself,
Hmm.
then it takes the power away from other people doing it. Because I was teased growing up, and then I was never a fan of that. I think they call it bullying now. But when I was in school, it was just like, that's how kids are, and man up and all that stuff, right? And don't let people push you around. Right now it's like, if anybody says anything about anybody, it's bullying, and you're suspended and all that stuff. But like growing up is just kind of getting made fun of. I didn't like it, and I didn't want to
Mm.
the situation because just being different from everybody else. There is a scene. I don't know if you've ever seen 8 Mile.
8 Mile, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So there's a scene in 8 Mile where they're having the rap battle at the end, and Eminem just starts saying a bunch of stuff about himself that everybody else makes fun of, and then it's
Mm.
like, and then he gives Papa Doc the mic, and he can't say anything because he's already said everything about himself that somebody would make fun of. That's right. So I think one thing I've learned doing comedy is that you can just you make fun of yourself, and then it's okay to make fun of yourself, right? And people are probably thinking certain things about you based on your appearance, and people probably want to make fun of certain things, but you've already done it, so it's
Yeah.
redundant for somebody else to say something that you've already said. So yeah, so that's the main thing. One challenge I have had is just kind of explaining to people that I have low vision because I grew up trying to look like somebody who didn't have low vision because they didn't want to
Yeah.
be again teased or treated differently. And then when you try to explain to something, oh well, I need help, finding where I'm going, and the point, they'll be like, it's over there, and I'll be like, oh, well, can you be more specific? I don't see that well, and it's like, oh well, how come you don't have you don't have glasses or a cane or a dog? And it's like, well, it's not, you know, not that kind of vision loss, but and then it's like you have to go into the whole story. So it's like, yeah, that's the whole so I was able to do material based on that, on like people's perception and how people I guess it goes along with being black too, right? So people
Mhm.
see you and they assume things about you just based on your appearance or what they think they know about you. So I can flip it and then I can turn into material and kind of own it, right? Rather than let anybody else control the narrative about me, right? Because I want to be in control of that.
Yeah, no, I love the mindset, and I have the same exact mindset
Yeah,
where even I use that example of a sword, right? Like
yeah,
a sword could be used in both ways. It could either be used in harm
yeah,
or it could be used for good, right?
yeah,
So I find even the experience, and just like you highlighted with comedy, when you start using that sense of humor and you can make fun of yourself, it makes you endearing to people, right?
right.
And even getting in this comedy game, like because you got me into it, it's all your fault. Like you helped me taste the rivers of stand-up comedy.
Yeah,
I find that I built a sense of confidence,
yeah,
as you're making mention, where people feel comfortable, right? Like they play along with the jokes, but then after it's just over and it's just like, oh, okay, you know what I mean? So yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and to incorporate that with blackness as well as disability, I find that it just takes all these crazy stereotypes that we come across, and we are able to accentuate it where people are like, okay, that does sound pretty silly, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah, so even with this, and I always wondered with comedians, and even something that I might run into, knowing that you're a comedian,
Hmm.
does it take away that sense of having emotion, or if you're having a bad day or you wanting to be serious with someone and them kind of looking at you and be like, haha, it's a comedian. Like I think of people like Kevin Hart or Dave Chappelle or other comedians out there where constantly something could happen. People are like, ah, haha, it's still funny. Do you ever run into aspects such as that?
I would say, yeah. I mean, there are times where people think when you're talking like real talk, and they think you're doing material. So I think that's probably a thing that's like a legitimate thing. Also, if you're, I guess some people have like a comedic tone. I don't really, but sometimes when your voice changes or your tone changes, they think it's like you're trying to be on.
Yeah.
But I'm like one of those people that I'm like I wouldn't say I'm not always on. So I think it's hard for people to know when you've flipped that switch. But I mean, definitely when I'm on. I mean, I am funny in personal life, so I do joke about stuff, but I'm not like I don't constantly joke about stuff. Like I watched a documentary on Robin Williams, and he's very like energetic and bubbly and bouncing
Hmm.
around,
Slip
doing
on a banana
voices, doing impressions,
peel
and
type
I
of.
always just like look at him and I always think, oh man, it must be like so exhausting to be Robin Williams because he's just like it seems like he's on all the time, but
Mm,
you know, he's got to eventually be exhausted. But like, so for me to like try to be on all the time, I would like, I'm tired just thinking about it. So yeah, so it's just very, I guess that is the perception of you once people know that you do comedy or you're a comedian. But yeah, I don't. I mean, I definitely don't want people to think I'm on all the time or that I'd rather I'm kind of like a ninja when it comes to being funny, where it's like you're not expecting it, and then I'll hit you with a joke. But I hate it when people will say, oh, you're a comedian, tell me a joke, and it's like hate being put on the spot like that because like one thing
mhm.
you learned in the second city is that yeah, it doesn't work like that, right? Because you're expecting a joke and then you have to cue it up and stuff, but it's not like, to be put on the spot like that, right? Because there's a lot of preparation and setting the mood and writing and all that stuff, right? So to just come up with something off the top of your head, even if it's something you wrote, right? Then it's not the stage isn't necessarily set, right?
Uh,
So yeah,
uh,
again, I'd rather be in control of that. I know when I'm on and when I'm not.
yeah, and I just crossed out one of my notes that
Yeah.
said, "Get Jason to tell." I'm joking. I'm joking. No, it's very true. Like that whole being on, especially for us being in the realm of accessibility and advocacy, right?
Yeah.
Where we do have to flip the hats, right? When it comes to advocacy for even both our intersectionalities, right?
Mhm.
So definitely when you said kind of flipping the script
Yeah.
and having to be serious, having that sense of humor, it is good to have that line. So making mention, and as I was making mention of accessibility, I mentioned the double A's, you know what I mean? And I ain't talking about batteries, you know?
Yeah.
Accessibility and advocacy. So within comedy, and this popped up in my head. I remember when you got me my first gig. Thank you
Hmm.
so much. I appreciate that.
Hmm.
And you told me you were making mention that when you're done your gig
Hmm.
or when your time comes up, they flash a white light
Yeah.
to let you know that your time's up.
Hmm.
So I thought to myself, damn, man, I could see lights, but even
Hmm.
some of the house lights, I might think that's a white light or that might be the light. And I thought about it for sure. So I am wondering within comedy, is there space for accessibility to be added? And what kind of ideas would you think to yourself for it to add
Yeah,
accessibility?
definitely. I had to learn the hard way because, again, when I started, there weren't any other, I didn't know any other comics who were like blind or low vision or even deaf blind, if that's a thing. So you just had to figure things out. Because I did a show once or an open mic where I was doing material and I didn't see the light, and then because it was in a bar, it was kind of crowded, and then I was like kind of went over my time, and then somebody ran up to the stage, and they were just using their phone as the light, and then not even the flashlight, just the phone screen. So I wasn't
Mm,
seeing it, and then they ran up to the stage waving their phone, and it was at a time. So I mean, I guess they probably thought I was being like a spotlight, like I was hogging the spotlight. But it was just like I was just kind of I was waiting to get that signal, which I didn't see. So then I learned from there to tell people before I go on. I might not see the light from the back of the room, so you might have to like get close to the stage so I can see what you're doing, and then also what I would do is time myself. Um, so basically, just I have have a smartwatch. So if it's like usually sets for like 5 minutes or 7 minutes. So and then they light you like 1 minute before. So if I'm doing 7 minutes and they're gonna light me at 6, I'll set my alarm my timer for 6 minutes, and then I know when it goes off to just kind of wrap it up. So the um even if the person that's flashing the light doesn't like they don't do it on time, or they're talking, or they're having a cigarette and they don't think to like put on the light, I can do it. I can wrap myself up. So because another thing I learned, I went over another show, and they said, just do when you're doing your material, just try to time it so it's like a hard stop time. So even if you don't get the light, you're doing the appropriate amount of time. So one thing to be as more accessible for that would be just time yourself if you're not able to see the light. I guess another thing I learned from CNIB has an artist network. So one thing I learned, there was a comic that I think she lives in Edmonton. I forget her name. I feel bad, but anyway.
all good.
So one thing that everyone should do, but they don't, is they should put like a yellow strip at the end of the stage.
Mm,
So then people who have like, if you have like low vision, you can at least see the front of the stage, because apparently a hazard is getting too close to the edge and falling off the stage. So that's like a legitimate hazard for people who have trouble seeing, and not everybody will stand in one spot and tell jokes, right? So a lot of people want to be able to move around. So it's kind of like when you're riding the subway, or if you're crossing the street and there's like a yellow curb to tell you to stay back. So all comedy, if they have an elevated stage, they should have that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely another way they should be accessible. So if you go somewhere and they don't have it, I would just have that conversation with the manager. Hopefully it can be made into like an actual, like a standard where everyone has to do it, but we're not there yet. Can't
Yeah.
think of
And
anything else. I think those are the main ones, just to make it accessible. I think there was one, it doesn't come up often in stand-up, but I always tell people that I wouldn't host a talk show because they read their jokes off of cue cards. And you have to be able to read the cue cards, and then I wouldn't be able to do that. So I'm always like jealous of like talk show hosts or award show hosts. They get to read their stuff off a teleprompter. So I think they have to eventually figure out a way to make that accessible, especially before I get to TV. So then I don't have to figure things out. But it's definitely a possibility if you're doing like, say, like TV or something, or like a stage show where you have to read off a cue card. So it's another way that it could be more accessible. But yeah, definitely a lot of room. Also, one more thing I'd recommend is, if you have a bar or a comedy club, or you're producing a comedy show, I would just walk through it. And if you don't have vision loss yourself, then I would get somebody who does have vision loss and ask them to do a walkthrough, and ask them for their input. Especially like, especially if you can find a comedian. But I would definitely do it. I've done walkthroughs and I've done them for like TTC and for the city of Toronto, and it's definitely helpful, because I think some people who don't have those accessible needs might not think that there are hazards or there's room for improvement. But yeah, I would talk to somebody who actually has that lived experience.
I love it. I love how us just being in the realm of comedy, and you performing, you obviously performing more than me,
Right.
just knowing that there's things that do need to be changed. And yeah, along with the yellow strip, even maybe having something tactile, right? Like,
Yeah, tactiles too.
yeah, put in front, or even if as a large scale, macro scale, like for comedy clubs to have someone like tap something, right?
Right.
Or a distinguishable noise, and that would even be perfect as part of the gig. It's just like, who's making noise? Oh yeah, yeah, that's my.
Yeah, like a horn or a bell or something.
Yeah, it's like, what is this, a hockey game? How dare you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a really good to have that keen eye to bring to comedy, because just like anybody else, us folks still enjoy comedy and we want to be a part of it. We have so much to tell.
Yeah.
So even going into my next question, do you have any favorite jokes that just over the years that you're just like, this has been incredible, that you would like to share with us? Because I know we don't want to give it away, you know what I mean? We might have to patent it after, so no one steals
Well, I
this
mean, if
joke.
it's recorded, then there's a record of it. So
Oh,
nobody steals. I don't know if you've seen you ever watched a show called Dark Side of Comedy?
no, never
Oh,
seen it.
okay. Well, it's on Crave. It's pretty good. It's not funny, but it's about
Oh.
comedians. So they did an episode about Carlos Mencia. And they said he would steal jokes from other comics. So he would watch like George Lopez do jokes, and he would do his jokes like the next night. So this way there's a record of it. So if I do
Yeah.
jokes and somebody start doing the jokes, I can be like, oh, it's recorded. But yeah, there's some jokes. I mean, there's one. The first one that comes to mind, because it came up in conversation, was I do one where I tell people I'm blind, and then I pause and then tell them that I'm actually low vision, but it's easier to say blind because people understand when you can see and people can understand when you can't see, but they can't understand somebody that's like somewhere in the middle that has some vision, but not like, not like all their vision. And they can't just wear glasses for it. So people ask me, if you're blind, then where's your where's your cane and where's your blind dog? And then I'll tell them, well, first of all, I don't think a blind dog would be of much help to a blind person, but sure, I'll play along and I'll be like, well, I was taking my blind dog for a walk and he wanted to play fetch and I couldn't find a stick, because I'm blind. So I took my cane and threw it for the dog to fetch, and now I can't find either of them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
And
the
then I also say, being partially sighted, it's like being Patrick Swayze in Ghost, because I'm a man that has access to two worlds, but doesn't belong to either of them. So I'm not blind and I'm not fully sighted, so I'm somewhere in the middle. And then I also hooked up with Demi Moore. I guess you don't know who that is.
yeah, oh, I know Demi Moore. I'm waiting for was that the punchline?
That was one of the punchlines, and then at least I think she was Demi Moore. I didn't get a good look at her face.
Honestly, I love how, like I said, I love how it's the incorporation of blindness
Mhm.
and like I said, you are I don't want to say inspiration to myself, but just like I said, when I first heard your stuff, I was like, yes, man, Black Blind. You know what I mean? The only other person I really know is Daryl Lennox,
Mhm.
and that's pretty much it. But I love how it's just incorporated. And
Technically, Bill Cosby is blind in one eye, but I don't think he's much of a role model anymore.
yeah, who's that? Who's that again?
Bill Cosby,
Who's that? Never heard of him. Never heard of him.
he's a guy.
The,
He's a, he used to be a comedian a long time ago.
yeah, yeah. What's Jello, by the way? I don't know what Jello
Yeah.
is.
It's also, I think one of the challenges is going from doing bars to doing like corporate, like,
Yeah.
office stuff, and doing like office stuff and doing like stuff where you have to be clean all the time. It's like a transition. One thing they teach at Second City is always have like 5 clean minutes of material, in case you have to do like TV, then at least you can like pull that out. But I was actually just watching Kevin Hart
Mhm.
on 60 Minutes, and they talked about how he was supposed to host the Oscars and he got cut because he made some joke when he was doing nightclubs. He made a joke about how it would react if his son was gay, and then he never apologized, because it wasn't. I guess in his mind, it wasn't wrong. It was just like that's he was doing. That's his material. That's what's made him so successful.
Even with your whole career of stand-up comedy, or just your career in general, what's
Mhm.
some advice that you got from someone that still lives from you with you from this day?
I don't know, probably best advice I got was just to talk about yourself, like doing comedy, is to talk about yourself more, and talk about current, like topical, do like less topical humor, which I love. For those who don't know, topical humor is when you do jokes based on current events. And the problem with that is that it's only relevant for a week or two if you're lucky, and then you have to come up with new stuff, which I like. I like to come up with new stuff. I don't like doing the same jokes and boring, I don't like when one person's heard the same joke like over and over again. Because like I never want them to get stale. So I always like to write new stuff, but it is challenging because it's not always gonna hit. Doing
Mm.
topical humor, and like, it's more for guys who do talk shows and like Saturday Night Live and stuff where it's on every week. So yeah, I would say just talk about yourself more. So a lot of people will just kind of make fun of celebrities and themselves, and I mean not themselves. They'll make fun of other people and stuff and So, you make fun of yourself, right? It's like not,
It's safe.
you can't offend, yeah, you can't offend
Yeah.
people, talking about yourself because you're the one getting ridiculed. So just like, yeah, I would just say more, self-deprecating jokes, and you don't have to be mean about it, right? You can just kind of make observations and laugh it off, right? And you'll be fine.
Last question. Honestly, this was very, very intriguing, and it's so nice to have that humorous side of it. And just like I said at the beginning of the episode, the fact that with advocacy and accessibility and living with a disability and living as a racialized, different cultured person, it's those taboos, and it's very soothing knowing that you can kind of crack a joke about yourself and crack a joke about a situation and kind of ease that up. So for individuals who have similar circumstances, I might be talking about myself now, like now I think about it,
Yeah.
who want to get into comedy. What kind of advice would you like to let them know, or any comments that you would like to share for them?
I would say first off, I would say write your jokes. If you're like doing it for the first time, I would say write one joke and try to just like kind of workshop it, and tell your closest friends or family, because they'll be the most supportive, and just seek like honest feedback. Because I think a lot of guys will like not write jokes. They'll just like write. They'll kind of half-heartedly write on like a napkin or in the bar or a receipt or something, and then kind of try to like work off of it. But you can kind of tell when they trail off, or it starts funny and then it kind of loses momentum, that they didn't think the whole thing through. They just came up with like a premise or something. So I would say, write your jokes. What else? I think just kind of be mindful of what other people, not necessarily what they want to hear and what they don't want to hear, but what you can and what you can't say. I know there's like freedom of speech, but there are certain things that can get you in a lot of trouble on social media, or like banned from bars. And I'm not talking about myself. Although I have been warned a couple of times with jokes that I didn't think they weren't like mean spirited or hurtful or anything, but they had like it had like an underlying implication about, dating and relationships. So I had to
Learning
stop telling.
experience, a learning experience for sure.
Learning experience, yeah. So just kind of that, and then just be kind of listen to the audience. I mean, if they're not laughing, I always tell people you can't blame the audience for not laughing, right? So I mean, sometimes stuff is funny, but you're telling it to the wrong audience, right? So like I said, like with doing jokes in bars and comedy clubs, right? You get the 19 plus crowd, right? If you're doing like a corporate gig, right, you do the exact same jokes, they might not respond the same way. So yeah, kind of just be ready for that, and then just like um and then there's just been times where people like they don't get laughs, and best thing is to move on. Some people will kind of keep uh as beating a dead horse is the metaphor there, where it's like something's not funny, but you're like, I can make it funny. So it's almost like I'm in a hole and I'm gonna dig my way out of the hole, but that's not gonna get you out of the hole. It's just gonna get you deeper in the same hole. So just kind of know when to cut your losses, and just have like something else, and don't take anything too personally, right? Because it's like just it's you know people are uh you might not hit out of the park every time with the audience, but just whatever, if something you have a negative experience, kind of take it and use it as a learning experience and try to move on. I would also say one other thing is just kind of be yourself on stage. You can be yourself turned up, but a lot of people will look at their favorite comedian and then be like, oh, I can do that. And then they'll try to do like, so Chris Rock is a good example of somebody who does like, he does like 1 hour specials, and, you know, he's been doing it for decades, right? And, like since the 80s. And, you know, he's Chris Rock, so you can get away with certain things that some no-name guy in a bar cannot. And then if you have like 5 to 10 minutes, don't try to fit Chris Rock's 1 hour comedy special into your 5 minute set, because it's not going to work. So just do what works for you, and then just don't steal from other people, and don't try to be someone you're not.
Great pieces of advice. And we are rounding up this episode of The Lens Living Diverse. Before we let the ultra funny Jason Osborne go, do you have any social media that you would like to share with the audience at all?
Yeah, in Instagram and Facebook. So my Instagram handle is jason.osborne1, and Osborne spelled Osborne. And also on Facebook, under Jason G. Osborne. And again, Osborne spelled the same way, Osborne. So those are the main ones you can reach me at.
Oh, wonderful. Now, sounds great. And I really wish you the best. And I look forward to some comedy gigs and to see you strut your stuff. And know what? I'm not jealous that I'm the second funniest blind black guy out there.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I'm technically not blind, but I mean, either way, I'll own it.
Once again, thank you so much, Jason, for coming on today's episode.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to The Lens Living Diverse. We had a magical episode where we got to bust some guts and learn at the same time. So if you like today's episode of The Lens Living Diverse, we offer the podcast on many different outlets and platforms, including Spotify, Stitcher, and YouTube, and also anywhere that you get your podcast from. Also, if you have any feedback or have any ideas on episodes that you would like to see at The Lens Living Diverse, you can email it to advocacy@cnib.ca. Once again, advocacy@cnib.ca. And then also, if you want to know more about diversity and inclusion at the CNIB, you can visit the CNIB page, go to About Us, and then we have a section that says We Are CNIB, where we have all our diversity and inclusion resources. So once again, thank you for listening to The Lens Living Diverse, and I hope you have a wonderful day, everybody. Peace.